For more than 100 years, if you wanted to find the pulse of Detroit, you didn't go to the factory floors of the River Rouge plant or the boardrooms of General Motors. You went to the corner of Woodward and Gratiot Avenues. While the rest of the world measured Detroit's might by the rhythmic pounding of assembly lines and the roar of V8 engines, the locals knew better. The true heart of the city resided in a structure so massive, so intricately woven into the fabric of daily life, that it didn't even need its full name in casual conversation. It was simply the big store. The J.L. Hudson Department Store was never just a place to buy a pair of shoes or a toaster. To view it that way is to fundamentally misunderstand its role. It was a city within a city. A 2.2 million square foot red brick monolith that dominated not just the skyline, but the collective consciousness of Michigan. At its absolute peak, Hudson's was the second largest department store in the United States, bowing only to Macy's in New York, and it held the title of the tallest department store on the planet. But numbers, no matter how impressive, are cold. They don't capture the feeling of walking through those revolving doors. Hudson's was the stage upon which the entire drama of Detroit's 20th century was performed. It mirrored the city's explosive industrial rise, its glittering era of mid-century prosperity, the painful fracturing of its social fabric, and its long, arduous road toward renewal. To understand Hudson's is to understand Detroit, a saga of ambition, innovation, deep loss, and resilience. Part 1. The Visionary and the Redemption of Debt, 1881 to 1910. The story of this American icon actually begins across the Atlantic, in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. It was there in 1846 that Joseph Lothian Hudson was born. His family emigrated to the United States in 1855, and young J.L. Hudson brought with him a work ethic that would eventually become the stuff of local legend. But the path to retail immortality wasn't a straight line. It was paved with a devastating early failure that would have broken a lesser man. Before the empire, there was bankruptcy. The Panic of 1873 was a financial crisis that swept through the American economy, decimating businesses left and right, including Hudson's early ventures. In the Victorian era, bankruptcy wasn't just a financial state. It was a mark of profound social shame. However, it was Hudson's response to this catastrophe that defined the DNA of his brand for the next century. Although the courts had legally absolved him of his debts, he didn't have to pay back a dime. Hudson viewed his obligation differently. He vowed to repay every single creditor dollar for dollar, with compound interest. When he eventually found financial footing again, he did exactly that. This act of extreme integrity stunned the business community. It earned him a reputation for unshakable trustworthiness, a foundation of character that proved far more valuable than any marketing campaign. In 1881, redeemed and driven, Hudson opened his first dedicated retail store inside the Detroit Opera House building. It was a modest start for a man with a monumental vision. His philosophy was simple, yet revolutionary for the late 19th century. He insisted on unconditional return policies and fair pricing clearly marked on every item. He eliminated the haggling and price gouging common in that era, operating on the belief that customer satisfaction was the only metric that mattered. As Detroit began its ascent as an industrial powerhouse in the 1890s, Hudson's grew alongside it. The business rapidly suffocated in its initial location. By 1911, reading the tea leaves of a city on the verge of greatness, Hudson committed to a bold expansion. He broke ground on what would become the legendary flagship on Woodward Avenue. Tragically, J.L. Hudson never saw his palace completed. He passed away in 1912, shortly after construction began, but he left behind more than blueprints. And he left a robust corporate culture and 4 capable nephews, the Weber brothers, who took the torch and steered the company into a golden age that their uncle could have scarcely imagined. Part 2. The City Within a City, 1920s to 1950s. To call the Woodward Avenue complex a store feels like a gross understatement. By the time the final expansions were completed in 1946, the building consumed an entire city block. It was a vertical empire comprising 33 levels, 25 soaring above the street and 4, sometimes 5, basements digging deep into the Detroit bedrock. Architecture and scale. The sheer scale of the operation was hard to wrap your head around. The building was an architectural marvel that possessed its own power plant, capable of lighting a small municipality. It housed the world's largest private telephone switchboard to manage the flood of orders and inquiries. At its operational peak, the store employed over 12,000 people. To put that in perspective, the staff of Hudson's alone was larger than the population of many American towns. Navigating the store was an adventure. There were 51 passenger elevators, operated by attendants in crisp uniforms and white gloves, and 17 freight elevators moving mountains of merchandise. Behind the walls, miles of pneumatic tubes whisked cash and receipts between departments with a distinct whoosh-thud sound that became the background noise of commerce. The interior was designed to be a temple. The aisles were expansive, the ceilings high, and the fixtures crafted from polished mahogany and gleaming glass. It was designed to overwhelm the senses with a feeling of luxury, yet, crucially, it remained accessible. It was a place where the auto baron's socialite daughter and the factory worker's wife shopped under the same roof. The shopping experience. The saying went that you could be born, live, and die using only items purchased at Hudson's, and that wasn't much of an exaggeration. Beyond clothing and furniture, the store featured a pharmacy, a lending library, a fine art gallery, a full grocery store, beauty salons, a barber shop, and, in its earlier days, even a mortuary desk. But for many, the draw was the food. Dining at Hudson's was a ritual. The store housed several restaurants, but the crown jewel was the 13th floor dining room. It was here that the Maurice Salad became a culinary legend, a dish so beloved it is still served in Detroit restaurants today. For decades, the phrase, "meet me under the clock," referring to the massive timepiece inside the store, was the standard rendezvous instruction for friends, lovers, and business partners. The center of civic life. Hudson's executives understood early on that retail was about more than transactions. It was about entertainment and community. In 1924, inspired by similar spectacles in the East, Hudson's founded the Detroit Thanksgiving Day Parade. It became an instant institution, rivaling Macy's parade in New York, with the store's own executives often marching alongside the floats down Woodward Avenue. However, it was Christmas that truly cemented Hudson's into the souls of Detroit children. Every year, the 12th floor was transformed into Toy Town, a sprawling wonderland that drew nearly 500,000 visitors during the holiday season. Children would walk through an enchanted forest, eyes wide, to meet the real Santa Claus. Outside, the building itself became a spectacle. The exterior was effectively wrapped like a giant gift, and the street-level windows featured animated displays of such intricacy and beauty that they rivaled anything in Paris or London. For generations of Michigan families, the annual pilgrimage to downtown Detroit to see the Hudson's windows was the definitive signal that Christmas had arrived. Part 3. The Seeds of Change and the Suburban Shift, 1950s to 1960s. The years following World War II brought unprecedented wealth to Detroit. The automobile industry was booming, and the American middle class was expanding rapidly. But in a cruel twist of irony, the very product that made Detroit rich, the automobile, began to dismantle the dominance of the downtown flagship. The vision of Northland. In the early 1950s, the Webb family, descendants of J.L. Hudson, saw the writing on the wall earlier than most. They noticed that people were moving out of the crowded industrial city centers and into the sprawling green suburbs. Rather than fight this tidal wave, Hudson's decided to lead it. In 1954, Hudson's opened Northland Center in Southfield, just north of the city limits. It was a revolutionary concept, the world's first regional shopping center. It was an open-air mall designed around a massive Hudson's branch store, surrounded by acres of free parking. It was a smashing success, changing the way Americans shopped forever. However, Northland proved to be a double-edged sword. While it secured the corporation's financial future, it began the slow, painful cannibalization of the downtown flagship. The convenience was undeniable. Why drive downtown, pay for parking, and navigate gridlock when you could drive to Northland, park for free, and be home in time for dinner? Demographics and unrest. The 1960s accelerated this shift. Detroit, like many major American cities, was grappling with deep-seated racial tensions and the phenomenon known as white flight. The construction of the interstate highway system acted as a conduit, making it easier to bypass the city center entirely. Then came the summer of 1967. The civil unrest, often referred to as the 12th Street riot, was a pivotal, traumatic turning point for Detroit. Over 5 days of violence, large swathes of the city burned, while the Hudson store itself was not physically damaged and remained a fortress of calm. The damage to its ecosystem was fatal. The psychological break between the city and its suburbs calcified, perceptions of safety plummeted, the flow of suburban shoppers into downtown, which had already been thinning, dried up almost overnight. The vibrant, chaotic energy of Woodward Avenue was replaced by a palpable tension. Part 4. The Long Decline, 1970s to 1983. Throughout the 1970s, the big store fought a losing battle against economics and gravity. The operational costs of running a 2.2 million square foot building were astronomical. Heating, lighting, and staffing 33 floors became a financial nightmare as sales per square foot plummeted. The shrinking giant Hudson's attempted to adapt. They consolidated retail operations to the lower floors, effectively closing off the upper levels, leaving them as dusty time capsules. They tried to modernize the fashion departments to appeal to a younger, hip demographic, but the building was an analog giant trying to survive in a digitalizing world. It was designed for an era when labor was cheap, energy was abundant, and the department store was the center of the universe. By the late 1970s, the downtown store was losing millions of dollars annually. It was being kept on life support, subsidized entirely by the profitable suburban branches like Northland, Eastland, and Westland. The corporate leadership, now part of the Dayton-Hudson Corporation, which would later evolve into Target Corporation, faced a fiduciary duty to stop the bleeding. The closure. The inevitable announcement came in late 1982. The downtown store would close. On January 17, 1983, the doors were locked for the final time. It was a somber, gray day in Detroit history. Employees, some of whom had worked in the building for 40 years, wept openly on the sales floor. Customers wandered the thinning aisles, touching the fixtures and walls as if saying goodbye to a dying relative. When the lights finally went out, it signaled more than just a business failure. It was the end of Detroit's era as a premier retail destination. The city had lost its anchor. Part 5. The Missing Tooth and the Implosion, 1983 to 1998. For the next 15 years, the Hudson's building stood as a colossal tombstone in the center of Detroit. It was a reminder of what had been lost, too big to utilize, yet too expensive to tear down. The years of decay. Various proposals were floated to repurpose the structure. Could it be a prison, an apartment complex, a corporate headquarters? Each time developers ran the numbers and walked away. The floor plates were simply too large for modern office needs. There was too much interior space without windows. The ceilings were the wrong height for modern HVAC systems, and the cost of removing the asbestos was staggering. In 1989, the building was sold to Southwestern Associates, but no development materialized. By 1996, the city of Detroit took control of the property. The building had become a liability, a hazard that dampened property values in the surrounding area and stood as a psychological barrier to revitalization. The difficult decision was made. The big store had to come down. The day the earth shook, On October 24, 1998, Detroit witnessed a spectacle of destruction. It was the largest controlled implosion of a tall steel frame building in history at that time. Thousands of people gathered around the perimeter of the safety zone. The crowd was a mix of former employees wearing their old name badges, history buffs, and tearful residents holding candles. At precisely 5:47 p.m., a thunderous series of explosions ripped through the support columns. In less than 30 seconds, the 33-story landmark collapsed into a pile of rubble, generating a massive cloud of dust that coated downtown Detroit in a gray shroud. The physical structure was gone, leaving a 2.1-acre hole in the ground. For many, and the implosion felt like the final nail in the coffin for the old Detroit. Part 6. Legacy and Lessons. The vacant site remained a parking garage foundation for nearly 2 decades, a missing tooth in the city's smile. However, the legacy of Hudson's refused to die. The persistence of memory. Even after the building was gone, the Hudson's name retained a certain magic. The Thanksgiving Parade continued, now known as America's Thanksgiving Parade, keeping the tradition alive. The Hudson Weber Foundation, established by the family, remained a powerful philanthropic force in the city, funding arts, economic development, and community programs when the city needed it most. The story of Hudson's became a case study for urban planners and historians. It illustrated the fragility of urban ecosystems. And it showed that a department store is never just a store. It is a social condenser, a place where different strata of society intersect. When Hudson's closed, Detroit lost one of the few remaining places where the suburbs and the city, the rich and the poor, still rubbed shoulders. The scale of loss. To truly grasp what vanished, one must look at the data. Space, 2,124,316 square feet, approximately 49 acres of floor space. Height, 410 feet tall. Infrastructure, the building circulated 500,000 gallons of water daily and consumed the electricity of a city of 20,000 people. Human capital, a peak roster of 12,000 staff members, many of whom spent their entire careers within those walls. Part 7. Resurrection, Hudson's Detroit. The story, thankfully, does not end in a pile of rubble. In the late 2000s, as Detroit began to experience a genuine, albeit complicated, renaissance, the empty Hudson site became the focal point for revitalization. Bedrock, the real estate company owned by billionaire Dan Gilbert, acquired the development rights. They proposed a project simply titled Hudson's Detroit. The vision was not to rebuild the department store, that era is gone and likely never returning, but to build a new landmark that honored the site's history while projecting Detroit's future. The new tower. As we look at the site in the mid-2000s, it is being transformed into a mixed-use development featuring office space, event venues, luxury residences, and a hotel. The design includes a soaring tower that aims to be the second tallest building in Michigan. Crucially, the architects and developers have sought to integrate the soul of the old Hudson's into the new glass and steel. The design emphasizes public space, recalling the civic function of the old store. The goal is to restore the site's status as a center of gravity for downtown Detroit, a place where people gather not just to work or sleep, but to be. Conclusion, J.I.L. Hudson's Department Store was a phenomenon born of the Industrial Revolution, nurtured by the American dream, and eventually felled by the complexities of urban evolution. Its life cycle tracks perfectly with the trajectory of Detroit itself, from scrappy ambition to global dominance, followed by a painful collapse and a struggle for identity. While the 33-story brick giant no longer casts its physical shadow over Woodward Avenue, the shadow it cast over the hearts of Detroiters remains. Hudson's taught a city to dream. It taught a city that commerce could be dignified, that holidays could be magical, and that a building could be a friend. Today, as steel beams rise once again from that hallowed 2.1-acre plot, they carry the weight of a century of history. The physical Hudson's is gone, but the spirit of innovation and community it fostered is the very foundation upon which the new Detroit is being built. The story of Hudson's serves as a powerful reminder that cities are resilient living things, and while buildings may fall, the memories they house are indestructible.